The latest The Young and the Restless revelation suggests that Victor Newman is no longer operating from a place of simple frustration or wounded pride. He is operating from a far more dangerous state of mind, one built on humiliation, obsession, and the cold conviction that the world must be reordered until everything taken from him is placed back in his hands. Victor has always believed that power is not merely something earned through intelligence or force. To him, power is a natural extension of identity. Newman Enterprises is not just a corporation he founded or a throne he once occupied. It is an extension of his will, the living symbol of everything he built through decades of war, sacrifice, manipulation, and survival. So when that power is threatened, Victor does not respond like an ordinary businessman trying to recover from a loss. He responds like a monarch who sees rebellion spreading inside his own kingdom. That is what makes this current storyline so darkly compelling. Victor does not merely want his company back. He wants to erase the insult of having lost control in the first place, and he is willing to use every cruel, calculated, and morally indefensible tactic necessary to achieve that goal. If that means kidnapping Jack Abbott as leverage to force Phyllis Summers into cooperation, then so be it. If it means turning people into bargaining chips and reducing lives to pieces on an invisible board, Victor is clearly prepared to do that without hesitation. What makes this even more fascinating is not just the ruthlessness of the move, but the fact that it worked. It succeeded because Victor understands one of the oldest truths in Genoa City: no one is fully immune to fear when someone they care about becomes collateral damage. The kidnapping of Jack is not simply another outrageous twist meant to shock the audience for a moment before the story moves on. It reveals something profound about where Victor is mentally and emotionally at this stage of the game. He has always preferred domination to negotiation, but there was a time when his manipulation still carried a layer of strategic elegance, a sense that every move was part of a grand design aimed at preserving his empire or protecting his family in his own twisted way. Now, however, the design feels more aggressive, more personal, and more openly punishing. Jack Abbott is not only a rival from Victor's past, he is a symbol of resistance, pride, and old money endurance that has irritated Victor for decades. To take Jack off the board, even temporarily, is to send a message far beyond Phyllis. It tells every enemy watching that Victor is done pretending there are limits he will not cross. The act is theatrical in the worst possible sense because it weaponizes history. Victor knows that Jack's name carries weight. He knows Jack's disappearance creates panic, suspicion, and emotional pressure that radiates through the people connected to him. By using Jack as the trigger that forces Phyllis to bend Victor, proves that he is not only trying to reclaim control of a company, he is trying to reassert himself as the one man in Genoa City capable of making everyone else feel unstable, vulnerable, and afraid. That psychological advantage is worth as much to Victor as any legal document or corporate asset. In many ways, it is worth more, because Victor has always understood that once he can make people panic, their judgment begins to fracture. And when judgment fractures, he wins. There is something almost poetic about the way this story echoes the image of the chessboard that once stood in the main living room of Victor's second ranch house. That image matters because Victor has always seen life as a game of patience, sacrifice, and superior foresight. It is fitting that he now lives in a third version of his estate, a recreation built to mirror the original ranch house viewers first knew in the early 1980s. The setting itself feels symbolic, as though Victor is trying to restore not just his home, but an earlier version of his own myth. He is rebuilding the architecture of memory while trying to rebuild the architecture of power. Yet the most unsettling part of this metaphor is that Victor no longer needs a physical chessboard in front of him to play. The people around him have become the board. Jack is a captured piece. Phyllis is a queen he cannot fully trust, but desperately wants to force into motion. The company is the king he refuses to let remain in enemy hands. Even his own family members and allies become rooks and bishops in a game where loyalty is conditional and usefulness is everything. This is what makes Victor such a terrifying player. He does not merely move people. He studies what they fear, what they love, what they cannot bear to lose, and then he arranges the game so that every path back to safety runs straight through him. That is why Phyllis, of all people, has become such an intriguing opponent. She is unpredictable, reckless, and brilliant in the most chaotic way. Victor can usually outmaneuver disciplined enemies because their logic is stable and therefore readable. Phyllis is different. She is emotional but not weak, impulsive but not foolish, wounded but never passive. She does not always make clean moves, but she makes explosive ones, and sometimes those are even harder to defend against. Phyllis has accomplished something almost no one has ever managed on this scale. She made Victor feel exposed in his own kingdom. First, she handed him a weapon that detonated practically in front of him, not necessarily in the literal sense of a bomb, but in the emotional and strategic sense of an attack that went off exactly where it hurt the most. Then she took something even more important than pride. She took his company. That is the part of the storyline that changes everything, because Victor can tolerate many forms of conflict, but he cannot tolerate humiliation that becomes visible to the world. Losing control behind closed doors is one thing. Being publicly outmaneuvered by Phyllis Summers is another. There is a reason this conflict feels so charged. Phyllis is not a traditional power player in the Victor Newman mold. She does not come wrapped in legacy, dynasty, or generational influence. Her power comes from nerve opportunism, survival instinct, and an almost frightening refusal to stay down after being dismissed. That makes her victory especially humiliating for Victor. She did not beat him through inherited structure. She beat him through disruption. She inserted chaos into a system that Victor believed he controlled, and in doing so, she proved that his fortress is not as impenetrable as he wants the world to believe. For a man like Victor, that is intolerable. It is not just the loss itself that burns. It is the fact that the person who inflicted it is someone many in Genoa City have spent years underestimating, mocking, or treating as too messy to truly matter. Victor can forgive many things, but he cannot forgive being made to look fallible by someone he expected to control. That is why the image of Phyllis sitting in the CEO office at Newman Enterprises carries such powerful, dramatic weight. It is more than a visual. It is a provocation. It is an insult made architectural. The office itself has always represented polished authority, corporate intimidation, and the austere power of the Newman brand. To place Phyllis in that chair looking outward with the calm of someone who has seized territory she was never meant to hold creates a jarring emotional effect. It asks the audience to suspend disbelief in several ways, yes, but it also asks them to confront a deliciously uncomfortable possibility: what happens when the intruder starts to look like she belongs there. The detail about the view from over Phyllis's right shoulder toward the side wall becomes strangely important because it emphasizes the intimacy of the occupation. She is not just visiting that office. She is inhabiting it. She is breathing in the air Victor once controlled, making decisions in the room where he once dictated the fate of others. And perhaps that is why some viewers may feel as though something symbolic is missing from that setup, as if the office itself has not fully registered the scale of what has happened. There is an almost sarcastic quality to the question of whether the executive suite is missing a doodled mustache, because it captures the absurdity beneath the tension. This is a story where a woman who has spent years being underestimated now occupies the most sacred corporate space in Victor's empire. Of course, the audience is asked to stretch its faith. Of course, some angles feel exaggerated or surreal, but that surreal quality is part of the appeal. It reflects the emotional impossibility Victor himself is facing. He built an empire designed to keep people like Phyllis on the outside, and now she is seated at the center of it. Still, the most compelling aspect of the storyline is not the corporate takeover itself. It is the twisted dependency forming between Victor and Phyllis. They are enemies, but they are also becoming unwilling mirrors for one another. Victor sees in Phyllis the audacity he respects and the chaos he despises. Phyllis sees in Victor the cruelty she has always fought against and the power she cannot help wanting to master. Their conflict is becoming less about a single transaction or a single company and more about dominance, identity, and legacy. Victor wants to prove that Phyllis's win was temporary, accidental, and ultimately meaningless without the structure he built. Phyllis wants to prove that Victor's empire was never as invincible as he claimed, and that intelligence combined with nerve can still crack the walls of old money and male entitlement. This makes their struggle feel intensely personal. Jack's kidnapping becomes part of that larger emotional machinery. He is not only leverage, he is also a reminder that Victor cannot directly break Phyllis through logic or negotiation, so he must do it through emotional destabilization. He must create pain around her, uncertainty around her, urgency around her, because that is the only way to force movement from someone as stubborn as Phyllis. And yet every time Victor chooses coercion, he also reveals weakness. A truly secure king does not need to kidnap his rival's ally to prove control. A king who does that is admitting, however indirectly, that the board has shifted under his feet.